Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring Light Humour, Volume 2. Toy Shop by Harry Harrison. We Didn't Do Anything Wrong, Hardly, by Roger Kuykendall. The Last Letter by Fritz Leiber. Climate Disordered by Sam Merwin. Zloor for Your Trouble by Mack Reynolds. Toy Shop by Harry Harrison. Originally published in Analog, April 1962. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Because there were few adults in the crowd, and Colonel Biff Horton stood over 6 feet tall, he could see every detail of the demonstration. The children, and most of the parents, gaped in wide-eyed wonder. Biff Horton was too sophisticated to be awed. He stayed on because he wanted to find out what the trick was that made the gadget work. "It's all explained right here in your instruction book," the demonstrator said, holding up a garishly printed booklet opened to a 4-colour diagram. "You all know how magnets pick up things, and I bet you even know that the Earth itself is one great big magnet. That's why compasses always point north. Well, the Atomic Wonder Space Wave Tapper hangs on to those space waves. Invisibly all about us, and even going right through us, are the magnetic waves of the Earth. The Atomic Wonder rides these waves just the way a ship rides the waves in the ocean. Now watch." Every eye was on him as he put the gaudy model rocket ship on top of the table and stepped back. It was made of stamped metal and seemed as incapable of flying as a can of ham, which it very much resembled. Neither wings, propellers, nor jets broke through the painted surface. It rested on 3 rubber wheels, and coming out through the bottom was a double strand of thin insulated wire. This white wire ran across the top of the black table and terminated in a control box in the demonstrator's hand. An indicator light, a switch and a knob appeared to be the only controls. "I turn on the power switch, sending a surge of current to the waved receptors," he said. The switch clicked, and the light blinked on and off with a steady pulse. Then the man began to slowly turn the knob. "A careful touch on the wave generator is necessary, as we are dealing with the powers of the whole world here." A concerted "ah" swept through the crowd as the space wave tapper shivered a bit, then rose slowly into the air. The demonstrator stepped back, and the toy rose higher and higher, bobbing gently on the invisible waves of magnetic force that supported it. Ever so slowly, the power was reduced, and it settled back to the table. "Only $17.95, the young man said, putting a large price sign on the table, "for the complete set of the Atomic Wonder, the Space Tapper control box, battery, and instruction book." At the appearance of the price card, the crowd broke up noisily, and the children rushed away towards the operating model trains. The demonstrator's words were lost in their noisy passage, and after a moment he sank into a gloomy silence. He put the control box down, yawned, and sat on the edge of the table. Colonel Horton was the only one left after the crowd had moved on. "Could you tell me how this thing works?" the colonel asked, coming forward. The demonstrator brightened up and picked up one of the toys. "Well, if you look here, sir," he opened the hinged top, "you will see the space wave coils at each end of the ship." With a pencil he pointed out the odd-shaped plastic forms about an inch in diameter that had been wound, apparently at random, with a few turns of copper wire. Except for these coils, the interior of the model was empty. The coils were wired together, and other wires ran out through the hole in the bottom of the control box. Biff Horton turned a very quizzical eye on the gadget and upon the demonstrator, who completely ignored this sign of disbelief. "Inside the control box is the battery," the young man said, snapping it open and pointing to an ordinary flashlight battery. "The current goes through the power switch and power light to the wave generator." "What you mean to say," Biff broke in, "is that the juice from this 15-cent battery goes through this cheap rheostat to those meaningless coils in the model and absolutely nothing happens. Now tell me what really flies the thing. If I'm going to drop $18 for 6 bits worth of tin, I want to know what I'm getting." The demonstrator flushed. "I'm sorry, sir," he stammered. "I wasn't trying to hide anything. Like any magic trick, this one can't be really demonstrated until it has been purchased." He leaned forward and whispered confidentially. "I'll tell you what I'll do, though. This thing is way overpriced and hasn't been moving at all. The manager said I should let them go at $3 if I could find any takers. If you want to buy it for that price—" "Sold, my boy," the colonel said, slamming 3 bills down on the table. "I'll give that much for it, no matter how it works. The boys in the shop will get a kick out of it." He tapped the winged rocket on his chest. "Now really, what holds it up?" The demonstrator looked around carefully, then pointed. "Strings," he said. "Or rather, a black thread. It runs from the top of the model, through a tiny loop in the ceiling, and back down to my hand, tied to this ring on my finger. When I back up, the model rises. It's as simple as that." "All good illusions are simple," the colonel grunted, tracing the black thread with his eye. "As long as there's plenty of flim-flam to distract the viewer." "If you don't have a black table, a black cloth will do," the young man said, "and the arch of a doorway is a good sight. Just see that the room in back is dark." "Wrap it up, my boy. I wasn't born yesterday. I'm an old hand at this kind of thing." Biff Horton sprang it at the next Thursday night poker party. The gang were all missile men, and they cheered and jeered as he hammed up the introduction. "Let me copy the diagram, Biff. I could use some of those magnetic waves in the new bird." "Those flashlight batteries are cheaper than locks. This is the thing of the future." Only Teddy Kaner caught wise as the flight began. He was an amateur magician and spotted the gimmick at once. He kept silent with professional courtesy and smiled ironically as the rest of the bunch grew silent one by one. The colonel was a good showman, and he had set the scene well. He almost had them believing in the space wave tapper before he was through. When the model had landed and he had switched it off, he couldn't stop them from crowding around the table. "A thread!" one of the engineers shouted, almost with relief, and they all laughed along with him. "Too bad," the head project physicist said. "I was hoping that a little space wave tapping could help us out. Let me try a flight with it." "Teddy Kaner first," Biff announced. "He spotted it while you were all watching the flashing lights, only he didn't say anything." Kaner slipped the ring with a black thread over his finger and started to step back. "You have to turn the switch on first," Biff said. "I know," Kaner smiled, "but that's part of the illusion. The spiel and the misdirection. I'm going to try this cold first, so I can get it moving up and down smoothly, then go through with the whole works." He moved his hand back smoothly, in a professional manner that drew no attention to it. The model lifted from the table, then crashed back down. "The thread broke," Kaner said. "You jerked it instead of pulling smoothly," Biff said, and knotted the broken thread. "Here, let me show you how to do it." The thread broke again when Biff tried it, which got a good laugh that made his collar a little warm. Someone mentioned the poker game. This was the only time that poker was mentioned or even remembered that night, because very soon after this, they found that the thread would lift the model only when the switch was on, and 2.5 volts flowing through the joke coils. With the current turned off, the model was too heavy to lift. The thread broke every time. I still think it's a screwy idea, the young man said. 1 week getting fallen arches, demonstrating those toy ships for every brat within 1,000 miles, then selling the thing for $3 when they must have cost at least $100 apiece to make. But you did sell the 10 of them to people who would be interested, the older man asked. I think so. I caught a few Air Force officers and a colonel in missiles one day. Then there was one official I remembered from the Bureau of Standards. Luckily, he didn't recognize me. Then those 2 professors you spotted from the university. Then the problem is out of our hands and into theirs. All we have to do now is sit back and wait for results. What results? These people weren't interested when we were hammering on their doors with the proof. We've patented the coils and can prove to anyone that there is a reduction in weight around them when they are operating. But a small reduction. And we don't know what is causing it. No one can be interested in a thing like that. A fractional weight decrease in a clumsy model, certainly not enough to lift the weight of the generator. No one wrapped up in massive fuel consumption, tons of lift and such, is going to have time to worry about a crackpot who thinks he has found a minor slip in Newton's laws. You think they will now? The young man asked, cracking his knuckles impatiently. I know they will. The tensile strength of that thread is correctly adjusted to the weight of the model. The thread will break if you try to lift the model with it. Yet you can lift the model, after a small increment of its weight has been removed by the coils. This is going to bug these men. Nobody is going to ask them to solve the problem or concern themselves with it, but it will nag at them because they know this effect can't possibly exist. They'll see at once that the magnetic wave theory is nonsense. Or perhaps true, we don't know. But they will all be thinking about it and worrying about it. Someone is going to experiment in his basement, just as a hobby of course, to find the cause of the error, and he or someone else is going to find out what makes those coils work, or maybe a way to improve them. And we have the patents. Correct. They will be doing the research that will take them out of the massive lift propulsion business and into the field of pure spaceflight. And in doing so they will be making us rich, whenever the time comes to manufacture, the young man said cynically. We'll all be rich, son, the older man said, patting him on the shoulder. Believe me, you're not going to recognize this old world 10 years from now. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. We Didn't Do Anything Wrong, Hardly, by Roger Kuykendall. Originally published in Astounding Science Fiction, May 1959. Narrated by Tom Trussel. I mean, it isn't like we swiped anything. We maybe borrowed a couple of things but gee, we put everything back like we found it, pretty near. Even like the compressor we got from Stinky Brinker that his old man wasn't using, and I traded my outboard motor for, my father made me trade back. But it was like Skinny said. You know, Skinny Thompson. He's the one you guys keep calling the boy genius, but shucks, he's no. Well, yeah, it's like Skinny said. We didn't need an outboard motor, and we did need a compressor. You've got to have a compressor on a spaceship, everybody knows that. And that old compression chamber that old man, Mr. Fields, let us use didn't have a compressor. Sure, he said we could use it. Anyway, he said we could play with it, and Skinny said we were going to make a spaceship out of it, and he said, go ahead. Well, no, he didn't say it exactly like that. He didn't take it serious, sort of. Anyway, it made a swell spaceship. It had 4 portholes on it, and an airlock, and real bunks in it, and lots of room for all that stuff that Skinny put in there. But it didn't have a compressor, and that's why. What stuff? Oh, you know, the stuff that Skinny put in there, like the radar he made out of a TV set, and the anti-gravity, and the atomic power plant he invented to run it all with. He's awful smart, Skinny is. But he's not like what you think of a genius. You know, he's not all the time using big words, and he doesn't look like a genius. I mean, we call him Skinny because he used to be skinny. But he isn't now. I mean, he's maybe small for his age. Anyway, he's smaller than me, and I'm the same age as he is. Of course, I'm big for my age, so that doesn't mean much, does it? Well, I guess Stinker Brinker started it. He's always riding Skinny about one thing or another, but Skinny never gets mad, and it's a good thing for Stinker too. I saw Skinny clean up on a bunch of 9th graders. Well, a couple of them anyway. They were saying... Well, I guess I won't tell you what they were saying. Anyway, Skinny used judo, I guess, because there wasn't much of a fight. Anyway, Stinker said something about how he was going to be a rocket pilot when he grew up, and I told him that Skinny had told me that there wouldn't be any rockets and that anti-gravity would be the thing as soon as it was invented. So Stinker said it never would be invented, and I said it would so, and he said it would not, and I said, well, if you're going to keep interrupting me, how can I... All right. Anyway, Skinny broke into the argument and said that he could prove mathematically that anti-gravity was possible, and Stinky said sure he could, and Skinny said sure he could, and Stinky said sure he could, like that. Honestly, is that any way to argue? I mean, it sounds like two people agreeing, only Stinky keeps going sure, like that, you know. And Stinky, what does he know about mathematics? He's had to take remedial arithmetic ever since... No, I don't understand how the anti-gravity works. Skinny told me, but it was something about meson flow and stuff like that I didn't understand. The atomic power plant made more sense. Where did we get that what uranium? Gee, no, we couldn't afford uranium. So Skinny invented a hydrogen fusion plant. Anyone can make hydrogen. You just take zinc and sulfuric acid and... Deuterium? You mean like heavy hydrogen? No, Skinny said it would probably work better, but like I said, we couldn't afford anything fancy. As it was, Skinny had to pay $5 or $6 for that special square tubing in the anti-gravity, and the plastic space helmets we had cost us 98 cents each, and it cost $1.50 for the special tube that Skinny needed to make the TV set into a radar. You see, we didn't steal anything, really. It was mostly stuff that was just lying around. Like the TV set was up in my attic, and the old refrigerator that Skinny used the parts to make the atomic power plant out from, and then a lot of the stuff we already had, like the skin diving suits we made into spacesuits, and the vacuum pump that Skinny had already, and the generator. Sure, we did a lot of skin diving, but that was last summer. That's how we knew about Old Man Brinker's compressor that Stinky said was his, and I traded my outboard motor for it. I had to trade back. And that's how we knew about Mr. Fields' old compression chamber, and all like that. The rocket? Well, it works on the same principle as the atomic power plant, only it doesn't work except in a vacuum, hardly. Of course, you don't need much of a rocket when you have anti-gravity. Everyone knows that. Well, anyway, that's how we built the spaceship. And believe me, it wasn't easy. I mean, with Stinky all the time bothering us and laughing at us. And I had to do a lot of lawn mowing to get money for the square tubing for the anti-gravity and the special tube for the radar and my space helmet. Stinky called the space helmets kid stuff. He was always saying things like, say hello to the folks on Mars for me and bring back a bottle of Canal No. 5 and all like that. You know, of course, they did look like kid stuff, I guess. We bought them at the 5 and dime and they were meant for kids. Of course, when Skinny got through with them, they worked fine. We tested them in the airlock of the compression chamber when we got the compressor in. They tested out pretty good for a half hour, then we tried them on in there. Well, it wasn't a complete vacuum, just 27 inches of mercury, but that was okay for a test. So anyway, we got ready to take off. Stinky was there to watch, of course. He was saying things like, "Farewell, O brave pioneers," and stuff like that. I mean, it was enough to make you sick. He was standing there laughing and singing something like "Up in the air, Junior Birdman," but when we closed the airlock door, we couldn't hear him. Skinny started up the atomic power plant, and we could see Stinky laughing fit to kill. It takes a couple of minutes for it to warm up, you know. So Stinky started throwing rocks to attract our attention, and Skinny was scared that he'd crack a porthole or something, so he threw the switch and we took off. Boy, you should have seen Stinky's face. I mean, you really should have seen it. One minute he was laughing, and the next minute he looked like a goldfish. I guess he always did look like a goldfish, but I mean even more like then. And he was getting smaller and smaller because we had taken off. We were gone pretty near 6 hours, and it was a good thing my mum made me take a lunch. Sure, I told her where we were going. Well, anyway, I told her we were maybe going to fly around the world in Skinny and my spaceship, and maybe go down to Carson's Pond. And she made me take a lunch and made me promise I wouldn't go swimming alone. And I sure didn't. But we did go around the world 3 or 4 times. I lost count. Anyway, that's when we saw the satellite. On radar. So Skinny pulled the spaceship over to it, and we got out and looked at it. The spacesuits worked fine too. Gosh, no, we didn't steal it or anything. Like Skinny said, it was just a menace to navigation, and the batteries were dead, and it wasn't working right anyway. So we tied it onto the spaceship and took it home. No, we had to tie it on top. It was too big to take inside with the antenna sticking out. Of course, we found out how to fold them later. Well, anyway, the next day, the Russians started squawking about a capitalist plot, and someone had swiped their satellite. Gee, I mean, with all the satellites up there, who'd miss just one? So I got worried that they'd find out we took it. Of course, I didn't need to worry because Stinky told them all right, just like a tattletale. So anyway, after Skinny got the batteries recharged, we put it back. And then when we landed, there were hundreds of people standing around, and Mr. Anderson from the State Department. I guess you know the rest. Except maybe Mr. Anderson started laughing when we told him, and he said it was the best joke on the Russians he had ever heard. I guess it is when you think about it. I mean, the Russians complaining about somebody swiping their satellite, and then the State Department answering a couple of kids borrowed it, but they put it back. One thing that bothers me, though, we didn't put it back exactly the way we found it, but I guess it doesn't matter. You see, when we put it back, we goofed a little. I mean, we put it back in the same orbit, more or less, but we got it going in the wrong direction.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
The Last Letter by Fritz Leiber, originally published in Galaxy Science Fiction, June 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. On 10th month 1, 2457 AD, at exactly 9 a.m. Planetary Federation time, but with a permissible error of a millionth of a second either way, in the 5th sublevel of New York Robot Postal Station 68, Black Sorter gulped down 10,000 pieces of first-class mail. This breakfast tidbit did not agree with the mail-sorting machine. It was as if a robust dog had been fed a large chunk of good red meat with a strychnine peel in it. Black Sorter's innards went whir-clunk. A blue electric glow enveloped him, and he began to shake as if he might break loose from the concrete. He desperately spat back over his shoulder a single envelope, gave a great huff, and blew out toward the sorting tubes a medium-sized snowstorm consisting of the other 9,999 pieces of first-class mail chewed to confetti. Then, still convulsed, he snapped up a fresh 10,000 and proceeded to chomp and grind on them. Black Sorter was rugged. The rejected envelope was tongued up by Red Subsorter, who growled deep in his throat, said a very bad word, and passed it to Yellow Rerouter, who passed it to Green Rerouter, who passed it to Brown Study, who passed it to Pink Wastebasket. Unlike Black Sorter, Pink Wastebasket was very delicate, though highly intuitive, the machine equivalent of a White Russian countess. She was designed to scan in 3,137 codes, route special delivery space mail to interplanetary liners by messenger rocket, and distinguish 9s from upside-down 6s. Pink Wastebasket haughtily inhaled the offending envelope, and almost instantly turned a bright crimson and began to tremble. After a few minutes, small atomic flames started to flicker from her midsection. White Nursemaid 7 and Greasy Joe both received Pink Wastebasket's distress signal, and got there as fast as their wheels could roll them, but the high-born machine's malady was beyond their simple skills of oil can and electroshock. They summoned other machine-tending and repairing machines, ones far more expert than themselves, but all were baffled. It was clear that Pink Wastebasket, who continued to tremble and flicker uncontrollably, was suffering from the equivalent of a major psychosis with severe psychosomatic symptoms. She spat a stream of filthy irons at Grey Psychiatrist, not recognizing her old friend. Meanwhile, the paper blizzard from Black Sorter was piling up in great drifts between the dark pillars of the sublevel, and flurries had reached Pink Wastebasket's aristocratic area. An expedition of sturdy machines headed by 2 hastily summoned snowplows was dispatched to immobilize Black Sorter at all costs. Pink Wastebasket, quivering like a demented hula dancer, was clearly approaching a crisis. Finally, Grey Psychiatrist, after consulting with Green Surgeon, and even then with an irritated reluctance, as if he were calling in a witch doctor, summoned a human being. The human being walked respectfully around Pink Wastebasket several times, and then gave her a nervous little poke with a rubber-handled probe. Pink Wastebasket gently regurgitated her last snack, turned dead white, gave a last flicker and shake, and expired. Black Coroner recorded the immediate cause of death as tinkering by a human being. The human being, a bald and scrawny one named Potshelter, picked up the envelope responsible for all the trouble, stared at it incredulously, opened it with trembling fingers, scanned the contents briefly, gave a great shriek, and ran off at top speed, forgetting to hop on his perambulator, which followed him making anxious clucking noises. The nearest human representative of the Solar Bureau of Investigation, a rather wooden-looking man named Crumbine, also bald, recognized Potshelter as soon as the latter burst gasping into his office, squeezing through the door while it was still dilating. The human beings whose work took them among the top brass, as the upper echelon machines were sometimes referred to, formed a kind of human elite, just one big, nervous family. "Sit down, Potshelter," the SBI man said. "Hold still a second so the chair can grab you. Hitch onto the hookah and choose a tranquilizer from the tray at your elbow. Whatever deviation you've uncovered can't be that much of a danger to the planets. I imagine that when you leave this office, the solar battle fleet will still be orbiting peacefully around Luna." "I seriously doubt that." Potshelter gulped a large lavender pill and took a deep breath. "Crumbine, a letter turned up in the first-class mail this morning." "Great Scott!" "It is a letter from one person to another person." "Good Lord!" "The flow of advertising has been seriously interfered with. At a modest estimate, 300 million pieces of expensive first-class advertising have already been chewed to rags, and I'm not sure the steel helms, God bless 'em, have the trouble in hand yet." "Judas Priest!" "Naturally, the poor machines weren't able to cope with the letter. It was utterly outside their experience, beyond the furthest reach of their programming. It threw them into a terrible spasm. Pink Wastebasket is dead, and at this very instant, if we're lucky, 3 police machines of the toughest blued steel are holding down Black Sorter and putting a muzzle on him." "Great Scott! It's incredible, Potshelter. And Pink Wastebasket dead? Take another tranquilizer, Potshelter, and hand over the tray." Crumbine received it with trembling fingers, started to pick up a big pink pill, but drew back his hand from it in sudden revulsion at its colour, and swallowed 2 blue oval ones instead. The man was obviously fighting to control himself. He said unsteadily, "I almost never take doubles, but this news you bring, good Lord! I seem to recall a case where someone tried to send a sound tape through the mails, but that was before my time. Incidentally, is there any possibility that this is a letter sent by one group of persons to another group? A hive or a therapy group or a social club? That would be bad enough, of course, but... No, just one single person sending to another? Potshelter's expression set in grimly solicitous lines. I can see you don't quite understand, Crumbine. This is not a sound tape, but a letter written in letters. You know, letters, characters, like books. Don't mention books in this office! Crumbine threw himself up angrily and then slumped back. Excuse me, Potshelter, but I find this very difficult to face squarely. Do I understand you to say that one person has tried to use the mails to send a printed sheet of some sort to another? Worse than that, a written letter. Written? I don't recognize the word. It's a way of making characters, or forming visual equivalents of sound without using electricity. The writer, as is called, employs a black liquid and a pointed stick called a pen. I know about this because one hobby of mine is ancient means of communication. Crumbine frowned and shook his head. Communication is a dangerous business, Potshelter, especially at the personal level. With you and me it's all right, because we know what we're doing. He picked up a third blue tranquilizer. But with most of the high folk, person-to-person communication is only a morbid form of advertising, a dangerous travesty of normal newscasting, catharsis without the analyst, recitation without the teacher, a perversion of promotion employed in betraying and subverting. The frown deepened as he put the blue pill in his mouth and chewed it. But about this pen, do you mean that fellow glues the pointed stick to his tongue and then speaks, and the black liquid traces the vibrations on the paper? A primitive non-electrical oscilloscope? Sloppy but conceivable, and producing a record of sorts of the spoken word. No, no, Crumbine. Potshelter nervously popped a square orange tablet in his mouth. It's a handwritten letter. Crumbine watched him. I never mix tranquilizers, he boasted absently. Handwritten, eh? You mean that the message was imprinted on a hand, and the skin or the entire hand afterward detached and sent through the mails in the fashion of a Martian reproach? A grisly find indeed, Potshelter. You still don't quite grasp it, Crumbine. The fingers of the hand move the stick that applies the ink, producing a crude imitation of the printed word. Diabolical! Crumbine smashed his fist down on the desk so that the 4 phones and 2 score microphones rattled. I tell you, Potshelter, the SBI is ready to cope with the subtlest modern deceptions, but when fiends search out and revive tricks from the pre-atomic cave era, it's almost too much. But, great Scott, I dally while the planets are in danger. What's the sender's code on this hellish letter? No code, Potshelter said darkly, proffering the envelope. The return address is handwritten. Crumbine blanched as his eyes slowly traced the uneven lines in the upper left-hand corner. From Richard Rowe, 215 West 10th Street, horizontal, 2837 Rocket Court, vertical. Hive 37, New York, 319, NY, Columbia, Terra. Ugh! Crumbine said, shivering. Those crawling characters, those letters that you call them, those things barely enough like print to be readable. They seem to be on the verge of awakening all sorts of horrid racial memories. I find myself thinking of fur-clad witch doctors dipping long-pointed sticks in bubbling black cauldrons. No wonder Pink Wastebasket couldn't take it, brave girl. Firming himself behind his desk, he pushed a number of buttons and spoke long numbers and meaningful alphabetical syllables into several microphones. Banks of coloured lights around the desk began to blink like a theatre marquee, sending Morse code, while phosphorescent arrows crawled purposefully across maps and space charts and through 3-dimensional street diagrams. There, he said at last. The sender of the letters being apprehended and will be brought directly here. We'll see what sort of man this Richard Rowe is, if we can assume he's human. 7 precautionary cordons are being drawn around his population station. 3 composed of machines, 2 of SBI agents, and 2 consisting of human and mechanical medical combat teams. Same goes for the intended recipient of the letter. Meanwhile, a destroyer squadron of the Solar Fleet has been detached to orbit over New York. In case it becomes necessary to Z-bomb, Potshelter asked grimly. Crumbine nodded. With all those villains lurking just outside the solar system in their invisible black ships, with planeticide in their hearts, we can't be too careful. One word transmitted from one spy to another, and anything may happen. And we must bomb before they do, so that as to contain our losses. Better one city destroyed than a traitor on the loose who may destroy many cities. 100 years ago, 3 person-to-person postcards went through the mails. Just 3 postcard, Potshelter, and went Schenectady, Hoboken, Cicero, and Walla Walla. Here, as long as you're mixing them, try one of these oval blues. I find them best for steady swallowing. Bells jangled. Crumbine grabbed up 2 phones, holding one to each ear. Potshelter automatically picked up a third. The ringing continued. Crumbine started to wedge one of his phones under his chin, nodded sharply at Potshelter, and then toward a cluster of microphones at the end of the table. Potshelter picked up a 4th phone from behind them. The ringing stopped. The 2 men listened, looking doped. Crumbine with an eye fixed on the sweep second hand of the large wall clock. When it had made 1 revolution, he cradled his phones. Potshelter followed suit. I do like the simplicity of the new on the Puffylow phono commercial, the latter remarked thoughtfully. The bread that's lighter than air. Nice. Crumbine nodded. I hear they've had to add mass to the lead foil wrapping to keep the loaves from floating off the shelves. Fact. He cleared his throat. Too bad we can't listen to more phono commercials, but even when there isn't a crisis on the agenda, I find I have to budget my listening time. 1 minute per hour strikes a reasonable balance between duty and self-indulgence. The nearest wall began to sing. Mr. J. Augustus Crumbine, we all think you're fine, 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 fine. Now out of the sky blue come some telegrams for you. The wall opened to a small heart shape toward the centre, and a sheaf of pale yellow envelopes arced out and plopped on the middle of the desk. Crumbine started to leaf through them, scanning the little transparent windows. Electronic soap, better homes and landing platforms, psycho blinkers, your girl next door, poppy whoppies, poopsie whoopsies. He started to open an envelope, then, after a quick look around and an apologetic smile at Potshelter, dumped them all on the disposal hopper, which gargled briefly. After all, there is a crisis this morning, he said in a defensive voice. Potshelter nodded absently. I can remember back before personalized delivery and rhyming robots, he observed. But how I'd miss them now. So much more distinguished than the hives with their non-personalized radio, TV and stereo advertising. For that matter, I believe there are some backward areas on Terra where the great advertising potential of telephones and telegrams hasn't been fully realized, and they are still used in part for personal communication. Now me, I've never in my life sent or received a message except on my walkie-talkie. He patted his breast pocket. Crumbine nodded, but he was a trifle shocked and inclined to revise his estimate of Potshelter's social status. Crumbine conducted his own social correspondence solely by telepathy. He shared with 3 other SBI officials a private telepath, a charming albino girl named Agnes. Yes, and it's a very handsome walkie-talkie, he assured Potshelter a little falsely. Suits you. I like the upswept antenna. He drummed on the desk and swallowed another blue tranquilizer. Damn it, what's happened to those machines? They ought to have the 2 spies here by now. Did you notice that the second, the intended recipient of the letter, seems to be female? Another good Terran name too, Jane Doe. Hive in Upper Manhattan. He began to tap the envelope sharply against the desk. Damn it, where are they? Excuse me, Potshelter said hesitantly, but I'm wondering why you haven't read the message inside the envelope. Crumbine looked at him blankly. Great Scott! I assumed that at least it was in some secret code, of course. Normally I'd have asked you to have Pink Wastebasket try her skill on it, but—" His eyes widened and his voice sank. "You don't mean to tell me that it's—" Potshelter nodded grimly. "Handwritten too, yes." Crumbine winced. "I keep trying to forget that aspect of the case." He dug out the message with shaking fingers, fumbled it open, and read. "Dear Jane, it must surprise you that I know your name, for our hives are widely separated. Do you recall day before yesterday, when your guided tour of Grand Central Spaceport got stalled because the guide blew a fuse? I was the young man with hair in the tour behind yours. You were a little frightened, and a group mistress was reassuring you. The machine spoke your name. Since then I have been unable to forget you. When I go to sleep, I dream of your face looking up sadly at the mistress's kindly photocells. I don't know how to get in touch with you, but my grandfather has told me stories his grandfather told him that his grandfather told him about young men writing what he calls love letters to young ladies. So I am writing you a love letter. I work in a first-class advertising house, and I will slip this love letter into an outgoing 10,000 pack and hope. Do not be frightened of me, Jane. I am no caveman, except for my hair. I am not insane. I am emotionally disturbed, but in a way that no machine has ever described to me. I want only your happiness. Sincerely, Richard Rowe." Crumbine slumped back in his chair, which braced itself manfully against him, and looked long and thoughtfully at Potshelter. "Well, if that's a code, it's certainly a fiendishly subtle one. You'd think he was talking to his girl next door." Potshelter nodded wonderingly. "I only read as far as where they were planning to blow up Grand Central Spaceport and all the guides in it." "Judas Priest, I think I have it." Crumbine shot up. "It's a pilot advertisement. Boy next door, or that kind of thing, printed to look like handwrittening, which would make all the difference. And the pilot copy got mailed by accident, which would mean there is no real Richard Rowe." At that instant the door dilated, and 2 blue detective engines hustled a struggling young man into the office. He was a slim, rather handsome, had a bushy head of hair that had somehow survived evolution and radioactive fallout, and across the chest and back of his paper singlet was neatly stamped Richard Rowe. When he saw the 2 men, he stopped struggling and straightened up. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said, "but these police machines must have made a mistake. I've committed no crime." Then his gaze fell on the hand-addressed envelope on Crumbine's desk, and he turned pale. Crumbine laughed harshly. "No crime? No, not at all. Merely using the mails to communicate. Ha!" The young man shrank back. "I'm sorry, sir." "Sorry," he says. "Do you realize that your insane prank has resulted in the destruction of perhaps 500 million pieces of first-class advertising, in the strangulation of a postal station and the paralysis of Lower Manhattan, in the mobilization of SBI reserves and the de-mothballing of 2 divisions of GI machines and the redeployment of the solar battle fleet? Good Lord, boy, why did you do it?" Richard Rowe continued to shrink, but he squared his shoulder. "I'm sorry, sir, but I just had to. I just had to get in touch with Jane Doe." "A girl from another hive? A girl you'd merely gazed at because a guide happened to blow a fuse?" Crumbine stood up, shaking an angry finger. "Great Scott, boy! Where was your girl next door?" Richard Rowe stared bravely at the finger, which made him look a trifle cross-eyed. "She died, sir. Both of them." "But there should be at least 6. "I know, sir, but of the other 4, 2 have been shipped to the Adirondacks on vacation, and 2 recently got married and haven't been replaced." Potshelter, a faraway look in his eyes, said softly, "I think I'm beginning to understand." But Crumbine thundered on at Richard Rowe with, "Good Lord, I can see you've had your troubles, boy. It isn't often we have these shortages of girls next door, so that temporarily a boy can't marry the girl next door as he always should. But Judas Priest! Why didn't you take your troubles to your psychiatrist, your group master, your socializer, your queen mother?" "My psychiatrist is being overhauled, sir, and his replacement short-circuits every time he hears the word trouble. My group master and socializer are on vacation duty in the Adirondacks. My queen mother is busy replacing girls next door." "Yes, it all fits," Potshelter proclaimed excitedly. "Don't you see, Crumbine? Except for a set of mischances that would only occur once in a billion times, the letter would never have been conceived or sent." "You may have something there," Crumbine concurred. "But in any case, boy, why did you, written this letter to this particular girl? What is there about Jane Doe that made you do it?" "Well, you see, sir, she's—" Just then the door redilated, and a blue matron machine conducted a young woman into the office. She was slim, and she had a head of hair that would have graced a museum beauty, while across the back chest is an inadequate word, of a paper chemise, Jane Doe was silk-screened in the palest pink. Crumbine did not repeat his last question. He had to admit to himself that it had been answered fully. Potshelter whistled respectfully. The blue detective engines gave hard-boiled grunts. Even the blue matron machine seemed awed by the girl's beauty. But she had eyes only for Richard Roe. "My Grand Central man," she breathed in amazement. "The man I've dreamed of ever since. My man with hair." She noticed the way he was looking at her, and she breathed harder. "Oh, darling, what have you done?" "I tried to send you a letter." "A letter? For me? Oh, darling!" Crumbine cleared his throat. "Potshelter, I'm going to wind this up fast. Miss Doe, could you transfer to this young man's hive?" "Oh, yes, sir. Mine has an overplus of girls next door." "Good. Mr. Rowe, there's a sky pilot 2 levels up. Look for the usual white collar just below the photocells. Marry this girl and take her home to your hive. If your queen mother objects, refer her to, Potshelter here." He cut short the young people's thanks. "Just one thing," he said, wagging a finger at Rowe. "Don't written any more letters." "Why ever would I?" Richard answered. "Already my action is beginning to seem like a mad dream." "Not to me, dear," Jane corrected him. "Oh, sir, could I have the letter he sent me? Not to do anything with, not to show anyone, just to keep." "Well, I don't know," Crumbine began. "Oh, please, sir." "Well, I don't know why not. I was going to say, here you are, miss. Just see that this husband of yours never writtens another." He turned back as the contracting door shut the young couple from view. "You were right, Potshelter," he said briskly. "It was one of those combinations of mischances that come up only once in a billion times. But we're going to have to issue recommendations for new procedures and safeguards that will reduce the possibilities of once in a trillion. It will undoubtedly up the Terran income tax to a healthy percentage, but we can't have something like this happening again. Every boy must marry the girl next door, and the first-class males must not be interfered with. The advertising must go through." "I'd almost like to see it happen again," Potshelter murmured dreamily, "if there were another Jane Doe in it." Outside, Richard and Jane had halted to allow a small cortege of machines to pass. First came a squad of police machines with Black Sorter in their midst, unmuzzled and docile enough, though still gnashing his teeth softly. Then, stretched out horizontally and borne on the shoulders of Grey Psychiatrist, Black Coroner, White Nursemaid 7, and Greasy Joe. There passed the slim form of Pink Wastebasket, Snow White in death. The machines were keening softly, mournfully. Round about the black pillars, little mecho mops were scurrying like mice, cleaning up the last of the first-class male bits of confetti. Richard winced at his evidence of his aberration, but Jane squeezed his hand comfortingly, which produced in him a truly amazing sensation that changed his whole appearance. "I know how you feel, darling," she told him, "but don't worry about it. Just think, dear, I'll always be able to tell your friends' wives something no other woman in the world can boast of, that my husband once wrote me a letter."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
Climate Disordered by Sam Merwin, writing as Carter Sprague. Originally published in Startling Stories, March 1948. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The president of the Chamber of Commerce of Kuykendall by the Sea was stately and rather terrifying in his measured wrath. Nor was his peroration against the dapper young old man who sat at the foot of the long mahogany conference table lessened by the knowledge that he had the full support of the rest of that august body. But wily Cords, on whom all this anger was focused, appeared singularly uncowed by the disfavour in which he basked. As a seasoned resort promotion expert, he was not unacquainted with municipal ire. So many unforeseen factors could send resort trade swarming to the wrong resort, as had happened in this case. Having talked himself into the fat job of putting Kuykendall on the map as the seaside town where vacationers would have the amusement world at their feet, he had been forced to sit by and watch the bulk of the available tourist vacation trade pass to Burden Bay, 60 miles to the south. It was too bad, of course, but a fellow could only do so much. And despite your definite assurance, in fact your promise, that retail trade in Kuykendall by the Sea would pick up a minimum of 25% in the year you entered the employment of this chamber, it has decreased by more than 30%. In this same period, the retail trade in Burden Bay has risen by almost 40%. I, and the chamber whose spokesman I am, would appreciate an explanation. Gathering the skirts of his morning coat carefully to avoid unsightly wrinkles, the president sat down. The silence which followed his sonorous harangue would have been scooped up with a spatula. 8 pairs of eyes remained fixed with suspicion upon the object of his address. With a sigh, wily Cords got to his feet. Hands in pockets, he leaned against the table, jingling the change in keys his fingers found. He was going to have to make this good, or be out of a very soft, high-paying job. Fortunately, he had an idea. When I undertook to lift your resort trade here in Kuykendall by the Sea above that of Burden Bay, he began with an air of good humour that drew no response from the grave men listening to him. I could not, of course, foresee that Mrs. Quinlan in our rival metropolis was going to give birth to quintuplets. He paused, let it sink in. Nor could I look into a crystal ball and learn that Kuykendall by the Sea was going to be cursed with 5 straight weeks of fog and rain at the height of the season. And it is hardly my fault that the Burden coastal oil refineries should bring in 5 gushers. Granted, Cords, said the president, speaking without arising, but we cannot continue indefinitely against such buffets of fortune, not and pay $25,000 a year for protection against ill luck, without receiving an iota of protection. Your sentiments touch me deeply, said Cords, and I should not have been worthy of your more than generous salary if I had not studied the problem thoroughly and come to this meeting with a plan which should speedily put an end to the difficulties under which all of us have been labouring. Cords paused to let this sink in. He knew, as do all talented pitchmen, when he had his audience hooked. The expression in the 8 pairs of eyes upon him was still uniform, but it flashed a uniformity of hope. Gentlemen, he went on, the summer season draws rapidly to its close. It has not been successful. But Kuykendall by the Sea and Burden Bay have both built their reputations as resort cities, much like that of Atlantic City, upon the warmth of climate and water in fall and spring. I suppose to make Wiedenville by the sea the only mild-weather resort in this entire section of coastline." "And just how do you propose to do this?" asked one of the members, his interest aroused above his incredulity. In simple words, Wiley Cords told them. At first, there were a few protests upon humanitarian grounds, but they were not enduring. After all, the Chamber of Commerce was a collection of hard-headed businessmen. Furthermore, they were hard-pressed businessmen. Their ultimate approval was unanimous, as was their vow to mutual secrecy. There was little else they could do. Cold weather was a factor in Cords' scheme, but cold weather descends in occasional unseasonable snaps upon the balmiest of resort climate. Even in Florida and Texas there has been snow during recent years. For once the luck ran for Cords and his quasi-desperate employers. Early upon a morning in late September, less than a week after the showdown meeting, a plane took off, not from the Wiedenville Municipal Airport, but from a private field that lurked less prosperously and publicly in the resort city's villa-studded suburbs. The plane, a converted Mitchell B-25 American Air Force bomber, was piloted by Wiley Cords himself. Aviation was among his numerous personal accomplishments. There were bombs in the bomb bay, but bombs of a type not yet seen in war. Millions of pellets of dry ice were so stowed away that they could be sewed high in the atmosphere by continued pressure upon a release trigger in the cockpit. The cloud formations were just right, with heavy layers above the target area and little wind. The temperature, in the high 30s at ground level, was below zero 2 miles up. After getting a sight through the cloud strata, Wiley Cords began to sow his snow. Back and forth he flew for the better part of an hour, bombarding the clouds with ice pellets to make snow. He had timed his flight with care so that no other plane would be aloft when he reached the sky above the rival Burden Bay resort. No others took off once the snowstorm began. Incoming planes were routed to Wiedenville by the sea. Wiley Cords listened to the report on his radio as he flew back to the secluded airport outside of Wiedenville. From the tenor of the announcers, it was clearly evident that no one suspected the snowstorm had been deliberately induced by the hand of man. After taxiing his ex-bomber into the hangar, he got out of Flying Togs and drove to the Wiedenville City Club, where the members of the Chamber of Commerce were waiting. If the mood of the previous meeting had been glum, today joy was unconfined. Old whiskey was brought out, and a special banquet served by close-mouthed club attendants. The radio was left on, and each report of the inexplicable snowstorm which had brought a halt to the Burden Bay autumn season was the occasion for a toast. "The man who really deserves our thanks," said the President, lifting his glass to Wiley Cords. A chorus of "Hear, hear!" greeted his salute. Wiley, entering into the spirit of the occasion, waxed enthusiastic when he was given the floor after cigars were passed. "It is my belief," he went on, "that by repeatedly inducing snow to fall over our neighbour city, I can ultimately reduce its mean temperature by the very emanation of cold from the snow-covered ground to a point where it will remain colder than normal throughout the fall, winter, and spring. Furthermore," he added, his well-preserved face alight with optimism, "I see no reason why we should limit ourselves to snowstorms. The same dry ice treatment given to the right cloud formation above Burden Bay when opportunity offers should produce a certain percentage of rainy weekends and holidays. I can truthfully say that our worries are over." "Keep it up, and you'll find a welcome surprise in your pay envelope, Wiley," said the President, beaming. The arrival of the afternoon papers from Burden Bay was the signal to cease all speech-making for a good gloat. The journalists of Weedenville by the Sea's ancient rival, beneath a commendable effort to gloss over the disaster, were really crying catastrophe. Coming without warning, the baby blizzard, for it had amounted almost to that, had literally caught them with their plants down. Damage, it was hinted in stories hastily killed for later edition, would almost certainly run high into millions. Hotel reservations for the usually equable autumn months were already being cancelled. As if to prove it never snowed but it poured, the oil refinery chose that day to announce the failure of a sixth gusher and resultant passing of a dividend. 3 days later, when clouds again moved in on the coastline, Wiley Cords took to the air with another load of dry ice pellets. And once again he did his dirty work undetected and with disastrous results for Burden Bay. On his third trip, because of a low current of warm air of whose existence he was not informed, Wiley came in with a rainstorm that washed away most of the snow. But his fourth, fifth, and sixth one plane rained, more than made up for this lapse. Wiley Cords and Weedenville by the Sea were riding high. Hotels were packed, and concessions were booming. The public relations expert found his salary raised an added $100 a week. There was laughter at a chamber meeting over a Burden Bay picture release showing a couple of pretty girls in ski clothes backed by a slide made of the defunct oil gushers. "I'll get the chorus of Mike Todd's new musical down here next weekend and put them on water skis in bathing suits," promised the laughing Wiley Cords. Of course he knew it could not last forever, but he saw no reason for the run of good fortune to come to an early end. He had planned and executed his scheme too well. So he was not pleased to discover another plane above the clouds on his next trip over Burden Bay. Still, it was something that had to happen. He merely cruised on innocently, and was relieved when the other ship, a big four-motored flying boxcar, disappeared through the clouds. Then he swung back and did his stuff. He saw the plane on 3 more occasions as he placed snowstorms accurately over hapless Burden Bay, and its presence began to worry him. But the pilot gave no indication that he knew what Wiley was up to, and the discreet young public relations counsellor decided not to mention it to the men who were backing his scheme. As a result of this step, and of his own preoccupation with promoting the balmy atmosphere of Weedenville by the Sea, he was really caught off guard when disaster finally struck. As fall merged into winter, the reservations totals for Weedenville hotels fell off far more sharply than it should have, especially with Burden Bay out of the picture. It was the president of the Chamber of Commerce who broke the news to Wiley Cords after summoning him to his office in early December. There he simply tossed a telegram at his high-powered promoter. No words were needed to explain his mood. It was evident enough from the jut of his beetling grey brows and the bayonet angle of his corona. "Read this," he said laconically. "Read it and pack." Startled, Wiley complied, felt himself go grey and sick and shaky as he scanned the contents of the wire. It read, "To Chamber of Commerce, Weedenville by the Sea. Thank you, stop. A special thanks to Wiley Cords for tripling our off-season resort trade, stop. His snow-making flights no longer needed, stop. We have adopted idea ourselves, stop. Once again, thanks from the only ski resort on the coast. Stop. Come and try our new runs at our expense as small return for your favour. Stop. Burden Bay, Chamber of Commerce.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
A Zloor for Your Trouble by Mack Reynolds. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, January 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. I was sitting on the cot in the little room at the rear of my hand garage where I keep my equipment and most of my trophies, and cleaning my .257 Roberts when the knock came at the door. It was a sharp, decisive knock. Then the door opened, and I saw Wesley Marks for the first time. It didn't excite me. He said, "Mr. Napoleon Prescott?" I began to say, "Everybody calls me Nap," but then I didn't. There was something about this guy that didn't click with me. Say what you will against snap judgments, I still take my love at first sight, and enmity often the same way. For one thing, he gave me the impression of looking for trouble. He was about 6'2", and he had what he obviously thought was an aristocratic face. His nose was the type that used to be called Roman, and looked like it'd be honey to punch. He was dressed like a million, which didn't particularly impress me either. I'm on the rugged side myself, red-headed and homely to boot. He took in the rifle I was cleaning, and his eyebrows went up questioningly. "Collector?" he asked. Somehow or other he managed to put over the impression that he thought I didn't have the intellect to have a hobby. "Not exactly," I told him. "This is a tool, not a collector's item." There was almost a laugh in his voice now. "You mean you use that relic in your work?" I put the gun down, told myself to take it easy, then said, "They've made a lot of developments in weapons since this rifle was popular, but it still has advantages on certain types of jobs. For instance, if I was after a Kodiak bear up in the Alaska National Park," he snorted, "I'd take a bazooka rifle and be sure who came out on top." "Sure you would," I told him. "And there wouldn't be enough bear left to feed your dogs. I usually work for a zoo or a museum. They either want the animal alive or in good mounting condition. I admit that they've got guns now that one man can carry that sink one of the old-time battleships. Okay, but in my line I seldom need one." He didn't like my tone of voice, but he dropped the point and began looking around for a place to sit. I hadn't asked him to sit down, and I didn't now. I said, "Was there something I could do for you?" "I wanted to hire you for a rather lengthy period," he told me. "I'm all booked up for the next 6 months. This is something rather special." It always is when somebody wants you to cancel a job with a regular client. He didn't like me any better than I liked him. That was obvious. He said, "This comes under the heading of work for the government." I told him, "There are other professional hunters, some of them nearly as good as I am." The last was sarcastic. "Possibly better," he said, "but none of them are your size." I could feel my face approaching the colour of my hair at that one. "Keep my size out of it," I snapped. I indicated with a thumb a little statuette on my desk. "The guy my mother named me after was pint-sized too. He got along all right." He looked over at Bonaparte. He said, "Napoleon was a big name once, but he's only a bust now." "Listen," I told him, "you're asking for a bust yourself. Why don't you run along? I'm busy." He ignored me, found a chair that had nothing but a few magazines on it, tossed them to the floor, and sat down. "Your name was brought up because you're the smallest professional hunter on Earth. It'd save a few thousand credits in getting you to Mars and back." That stopped me. "What in Kurt are you talking about?" I growled. "The government wants a specimen, at least one, of a Zloor." "A what?" "A Zloor," he repeated. "A small Martian animal." I scowled at him. "And just why does the government want a Zloor?" "That's a secret." "Okay, I'll tell you another secret. Somebody else can catch the government a Zloor. I've never been off Earth, and I haven't any particular hankering to go now." I picked up the .257 Roberts again and reached for my oil can. He got to his feet, something just this side of a sneer on his face, and said, "I doubt if you could have got one anyway." I said easily, "If anyone else could catch it, I could." He reached for the doorknob. "I'd lay 1,000 credits against that," he said. He began to leave. "Wait a minute, buddy," I snapped. "Are you just sounding off, or have you got 1,000 credits you don't care what happens to?" He turned and faced me. "I am willing to wager 1,000 credits that you can't capture a Zloor." "How big are they?" "About the size of a rabbit." I glowered at him. "They very fast, or very poisonous, or what?" He shrugged. "They can't run quite as fast as a common Terran hare, and I understand they're quite gentle." "Then why haven't they been captured?" "Among other things, Napoleon," he rolled my name over his tongue as though he got a big laugh from it. "There have been only a few hundred persons in all that have gone to Mars. Few of them, to my knowledge, have been interested in the life forms there. The expense of freight in space is much too high for Terran zoos to transport Martian life forms, particularly alive, considering the cost of duplicating in the spacecraft the living conditions necessary to—" "All right," I snapped. "Just a minute." I picked up the visor phone and dialed rapidly. In seconds, Jerry Mason's friendly pan lit up the screen. "Listen, Jerry," I said. "Have you ever heard of a Martian Zloor?" His eyebrows went up. "Sure. What? Are they particularly fast?" "No, of course not, but—" "Are they dangerous?" He grinned, but he was still puzzled. "I'd say they were about the least dangerous animal I ever heard of, but nup—" "Just one more question, Jerry. I'm in a hurry. Do you think I could catch one?" "I can't think of anything you could catch easier." He started to give one of his short bursts of laughter. "But—" "Thanks, Jerry," I told him. "See you later." I snapped off the set and turned back to Wesley Marks. "All right. Answer just one question, and I'll take up that bet of yours. What's secret about this?" "If I tell you, you'll take on the job?" "The job and the 1,000 credit bet," I grated. "Very well. It is suspected that the Zloor is an alien life form." I stared at him. "Are you around the corner?" I demanded. "Of course it's an alien life form. Didn't you just say it's a Martian animal?" But some authorities think it is alien to this solar system. At least they suspect so. That's why the government wants a specimen to dissect and thoroughly investigate. They haven't the facilities on Mars, of course, so it will be necessary to bring one back here." I still stared at him. "Alien to the solar system? Your roof must be leaking. How would it get here?" A sudden suspicion hit me. "You mean it's intelligent? I thought there wasn't any intelligent life forms on Mars." He shook his head. "It's a stupid, herbivorous animal." He shot a glance down at his watch. "The shuttle for the space station leaves in 3 hours. Can you make it?" I glared at him. "You give me plenty of time, don't you? I'll make it all right. But first I want this bet down in writing." "Of course," he said smoothly. I had to hustle plenty. The Zloor wasn't any bigger than a rabbit, and I knew that life forms on Mars were in general small, so I took nothing larger than my little carbine-sized .22 Hornet, another gun that Wesley Marks probably would have sneered at, but which I wouldn't have traded for all the automatics you could shake a stick at. I didn't take much else. No clothes except the shorts I wore when I climbed into the shuttle rocket for the space station. When Mark said freight rates in space were high, he wasn't just whistling terror forever. I could buy clothes and any other equipment I needed a good deal cheaper on Mars than the cost of transporting them there would come to. For one thing, when anybody left the colony planet to come back to Terra, they invariably left behind everything in the way of clothing and personal equipment. For another, a certain amount of these things were being manufactured on Mars from native raw materials in an attempt to escape the murderous space rates. After the 4G's acceleration had cut off, and we were in free fall, I took the opportunity to read the contract I'd hurriedly signed with Wesley Marks. On thorough reading, the contract didn't seem too bad. All my expenses to and from Mars were paid by Marks. I also got 5 credits a month in the way of salary. No fortune, but average pay for a Terran worker. If I caught a Zloor and brought it back alive, I got 500 credit bonus. If I brought 2 back alive, a 700 credit bonus. If I brought a dead one back, I got a 300 bonus. Wesley Marks didn't seem to be interested in getting more than 1 dead one, since there wasn't any provision for a larger number. He'd given me to understand that this job was for the government, but from the way the contract read, I was working for the Marks Enterprises. That irritated me for a minute or so, but I finally shrugged it off. He probably had a government contract to secure one of the things. I still couldn't figure out what his angle was, but I knew there must be one. Too much money was involved to make this a routine assignment such as I usually work on for the zoos. Evidently, Marks ran some sort of an expediting outfit which took on off-trail contracts. At this point, I might do a little in the way of describing my trip to the space station which circles Terra and is used as a take-off point to Luna and the planets. I might go on and tell of my journey from there to the space station in orbit about Mars, and then, further still, of my shuttling down to Fort Mars and my first impressions of landing there, of the 1/6 gravity, the thin air, the plastic dome which covers the whole little city. But the trouble is that 100 people a lot quicker with a dictotyper than I am have already done the job. I'll just leave that part of it and take up with my first contact with my fellow Terrans on Mars. One of the old gags is to the effect that when Greek meets Greek, they start a restaurant. Okay, maybe, but I do know this, that when man in general starts up a new colony, one of the first buildings he puts up is a bar. At any rate, as soon as I was settled at the Builtless Hotel, the name, of course, is a gag, but the place lived up to it, I made my way to Sam's. Now, there's something that invariably happens to people who get around. It's happened to you, if you're one of us. Maybe you're walking through the Congo Game Preserve, figuring there isn't another man, white or otherwise, within 100 kilometers. Suddenly you run into another party, and somebody yells, "Hello, Nap! What in Kurt are you doing here?" The last time you saw him was in San Francisco. Or maybe you're doing some solitary drinking in some obscure bar in Guatemala. The guy next to you looks over and says, "Say, aren't you Snap Prescott, the brother of—" And of course, you are. Well, that was it. I hadn't any more got up to the bar and told Sam, "Let me have some of this Martian woji I've been hearing so much about," when I heard somebody yelp, "It's Nap! I'll be a grinning Macron if it isn't Nap!" I turned around, and there was Mike Holliday, as big as life, and twice as drunk. He waddled his bulk over to me. Mike always waddles when he's soused, from the table where he'd been sitting. "By the holy jumping Vodo," he crowed, "I'll bet my left arm you came to get a Zloor." I'd been grinning and holding out my hand to clasp his, but that stiffened me. He saw it and began to laugh uproariously. "Another joiner of the club," he yelped. "Come on over and meet your fellow members. You got one of them Wesley contracts too?" That did it. I went over and met the boys. Mike Holliday wasn't the only acquaintance of mine in Fort Mars. In fact, it was like a convention of the outstanding professional hunters of Earth. They all shouted their greetings, some of them laughing so hard tears rolled down their cheeks. Evidently, they got a big kick every time a newcomer was added to their ranks. I shook hands with some, but most were too hilarious to go through the ceremony. Blackie Conover yelled, "I'll bet anybody 2-1 he brought a 22 Hornet to shoot himself as law. 2-1. "Do we look like suckers?" Mike yelled back at him. I sank into a chair and took it for a while. "I can wait," I growled at them. "Sooner or later somebody'll get around to telling me what goes on." "He can wait," he says. Doughbelly fairly yelped in delight. "Brother, he ain't just a whistling terror forever. He can wait. Bring on the Woji. Start the initiation." I woke up in the morning in Mike Holliday's apartment. I groaned and told myself that I was sworn off of Woji for all time. I didn't know then that Terracide liquor sold for 10 credits a bottle. Mike was grinning down at me. "You'll get used to Woji," he said. "I should live so long," I moaned. Then I sat up suddenly in the bed. "You guys wouldn't tell me anything last night," I said. He was still grinning. "That's part of the initiation into the Zloor Club. What do you want to know, Nap?" I swung my feet over the side of the bed and came to a sitting position. I groaned and shook my head in an attempt to clear it. "What are half the professional hunters I know doing on Mars?" He spun a chair around so that the back faced me and straddled it, his arms resting on the top rung. "Same thing you are, Nap, being suckers for that Macron Wesley Marks." I started to say something there, but he interrupted me with a wave of a hand. "This is what it boils down to. Marx has a contract with some branch of the government to bring back one or more laws, and don't ask me why he doesn't go out and catch one himself. He's tried." "He has, eh?" "Yes, he has. Had a whole crew up here. What makes it nice for him is that he's on a cost-plus basis. If he never succeeds, it'll still be money in his pocket. If he does, he gets a whopping big bonus. Every time he sends another man up here to take a crack at getting his law, he makes money. No doubt the way he told you the story, you'd think you were the only one trying." I snorted. He told me I'd been picked because I was the smallest pro-hunter in the game. Mike Holliday grinned. "He picked me because I was so big. I could stand the rigours of life of Mars," he said. "Well, if it's a racket, why doesn't everybody go home on the next ship?" "Probably for the same reason you won't. That sharper made me so sore I bet him 500 credits I could catch a slaw." "I bet him 1,000, I groaned. Mike whistled. "Where'd you ever get 1,000 credits, Nap?" "I broke into my piggy bank," I growled. "It's every cent I had in the world." "Well, we're all in the same boat. He made bets with all the boys. If we go back, we lose. As long as we stay here, we make 5 credits a month, plus expenses. And, besides, all of us are just conceited enough to think we can figure out eventually how to get one of the things home." "Now you're getting to the point," I told him. "What's so hard about catching a Zloor?" He began to grin again. "Nothing," he said, "and that's all I'll tell you now. Go out and find the gruesome details yourself." I went over to the wash basin and filled the bowl and dipped my head into the water. I didn't say anything else to him until I'd dried myself and climbed into my clothes. "All right," I said then. "Where do I go to see about getting equipment and men for an expedition to the Zloor country?" He laughed. "All you need in the way of equipment is your feet. That is, besides a plastic oxygen mask when you leave the dome." He pointed out the window. "Just head for the nearest rocky area. There's lots of it. You won't have any trouble finding a Zloor. In fact, they're numerous. No natural enemies." I scowled at him. "What keeps them down, then?" "Insufficient forage, I guess. You'll see." I picked up my .22 Hornet rifle and started for the door. "No time like the present, too?" I began to say. Mike was still grinning in the irritating manner he'd been displaying ever since the night before. "You won't need that gun," he told me. I'll just take it along anyway, I snapped. After leaving the dome through one of the airlocks, I headed out into the surface of Mars, weighted down with my leaded boots, standard equipment for cutting down some of the effect of the 1/6 gravity of the planet. Over to the westward, possibly 3 miles away, seemed to be a barren, rocky area. I knew that Mike Holliday wouldn't have deliberately lied to me. That was where Zloors were to be found. I made my way in that direction. "About the size of a rabbit," I muttered, "and half the hunters on Earth can't bring one back." I made the rocky area and found myself a suitable prominence from which to look around. In less than 15 minutes I'd spotted one of the things. They were about the size of a rabbit all right, and what was more, they looked considerably like one of the Earth-type rodents. Long ears, nub of a tail. I watched it for some time through the small glass I'd borrowed from Mike. It was evidently eating the bark, and possibly the wood as well, of a stunted, rugged-looking Martian tree which seemed to be growing out of almost solid rock. The boys had said that there were a lot of Zloors around, so I didn't have to worry about conversion. I took up the rifle, aimed carefully through the scope, and squeezed the trigger. I was interested, eventually, in getting a live Zloor, but it wouldn't hurt to have a closer look at one of the things to help me in planning my campaign. The gun snapped, and I could see the tiny bullet spank into the little animal's side. I'd got him. But something didn't look right. I took up the telescope again and peered through it. The Zloor was still eating. That stopped me. I could have sworn that I'd hit it, right amidships. I aimed even more carefully this time, for its head, and squeezed gently. That shot, too, hit dead center. But the Zloor didn't bother to stop its feeding. I sat there a long time, staring at it. Finally I snorted inwardly. Obviously, this was what had been stopping the others. This animal had some very effective natural body armor. Well, there is more than one way of skinning a Zloor, as well as a cat. I picked up the rifle and headed down toward the tree and the animal that was devouring it, figuring to get as close as possible with the idea of getting a really good look at the bulletproof beastie. I wished now that I'd brought my .257 Roberts instead of the .22 Hornet. At first, I was careful in my approach, slipping from cover to cover, but as I got closer, it became evident that the Zloor wasn't particularly timid, and that as far as it was concerned, I could come as near as I wanted. I stood off about 5 feet and watched it for a long time. Once it looked up and over at me, but then went back to the tree, in which it was making a respectable hole. I tried once again with the rifle, aiming carefully right behind its ear. The gun snapped, and the bullet thudded, but the Zloor ignored it. "Holy Wodo!" I snorted. "He's really bulletproof." In fact, he was more than just bulletproof. The shock of the impact of the high-powered 22 hadn't even bothered him. It wasn't just a matter of the bullet's inability to penetrate the hide. Well, I told myself, let's see just how close I can come before it runs off. I walked up to him cautiously. He didn't move. In my surprise, I even prodded him gently with my shoe. He still didn't move. He looked up at me again, his eyes a wistful yellowish colour, then went back to his meal. I shook my head, wondering if I was still suffering from the effects of the Woji binge, or what. This was just too easy. Maybe it was a sick one or something. I reached down and grasped it by the ears and started to pick it up. Have you ever tried to pick up something and found out it either weighed considerably more or was fastened to the floor? That's what happened to me. With Martian gravity what it is, I figured I'd have a weight of possibly 1 earth-pound of lift. Instead, I nearly broke my back, and the Zloor still didn't budge. I put more pressure to bear, all my strength, and the Zloor complacently went on eating. Hands on hips, I stood above the rabbit-like animal and stared at it. Finally I muttered, more than one way to bring home a Zloor, and taking my gun by the barrel, I swung it viciously down at the gentle-looking little animal, feeling like a heel as I did it. I might have saved my feelings, because 2 seconds later I was gazing wide-eyed at the shattered stock of my rifle, and the Zloor was still eating away at the tree. I tried just one more experiment before I called it a day. I put the rifle barrel under him and tried to pry him off the ground. The Zloor still ignored me, but the steel barrel bent under the pressure. The animal hadn't budged. Without knocking, I walked back into Mike Holliday's room. He was lying stretched out on the bed, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He didn't need to look at me. He said, "Nap, you are now a full-fledged member of the Zloor Club." "What does one of those things weigh?" I snapped. "Hey, redhead," he grunted, "don't take it out on me. I didn't invent them. Far as I know, nobody's ever weighed one, but it's been estimated that they go about 5 tons here on Mars, 6 times that on Earth." "That's insane." "Sure is. That's why the government wants one so badly. Just isn't natural for such an animal to develop in the solar system. Or anywhere else." He got up on one elbow and grinned over at me. "The theory is that it's a life form from some planet belonging to a white dwarf star. Some time ago, a guy named Adams at the Mount Wilson Observatory, back on Earth, estimated that the density of some of the white dwarfs was 2,000 times greater than platinum. I'm not much up on it myself." I scowled down at him. "How did it get here?" He was serious now. "That's the reason the government wants one so badly, Nap. They want to get it to their laboratories and find out everything they can. There's only seems to be one possibility, though." "What's that?" "If it is alien to the solar system and from a white dwarf's planet, it might have been brought here deliberately and left as a guinea pig." I began to say something there, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Possibly an exploring spaceship from the alien planet was looking for colony sites. When it got to our solar system, it left some of these animals with the idea of coming back in a few thousand years or so to see if the Zloors were able to adapt themselves to the conditions existing here." I ran my tongue over suddenly dry lips. "You mean that if the Zloors can live in our solar system, then these more intelligent aliens would figure they could use our sun system for a colonizing project?" He nodded. "Holy Wodo," I said. "No wonder they want some specimens to work on back on Earth." He relaxed again. "Well, at the rate we're going, it'll be a long time before Earth laboratories ever have the opportunity to mess around with our pal the Zloor." I got a chair and sat down facing him and said seriously, "Mike, brief me on what you and the other fellows have tried." "You don't have to ask. That goes with membership in the club," he grinned. "Among other things, we've tried building a steel box around one of them with the idea of putting wheels on it later." "That sounds good." "Uh-huh. The trouble was that when the Zloor felt like moving, he walked right through the side of the steel box, like you or I'd walk through a wall of tissue paper." "How about poisoning one?" I rapped. "You could get a dead one back a lot easier then." "They don't poison," he said. "And from what we can figure, they're practically immortal. We have never found a dead one." "What do you mean they don't poison?" "Just that, Nap. That animal can eat anything organic and thrive on it. Evidently, no poison that nature has ever produced affects it. At least, none of us have been able to dream one up." "How about narcotics? Something to dope it?" He shook his head. "To begin with, some of these Martian plants produce narcotic effects that make the products of our poppy look like food for babes, but the Zloor takes them in its stride. It's really got a cast-iron stomach. We've never been able to locate anything it won't eat and enjoy eating." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then, A bazooka rifle would kill one. Sure, he said, and splatter it all around the scenery at the same time. The laboratories need a good specimen. There was another long silence. Finally I said, Why in the name of Wodo won't they sink into the ground if they weigh as much as all that? They would, only they make a point of walking on rock. That must be one of the things that limits their spreading even more widely. They have to be able to forage on ground that supports very little vegetation. You could lift one with a derrick, he said. This is the 5th time I've been through this. Every guy that Wesley Marks send up here ask the same questions. Sure, you could lift it with a derrick if the derrick was big enough. Do you have any idea of what it costs to bring a derrick of that size to Mars? And that's not the only thing either. These laws are gentle as lambs, but they hate to be confined against their will. That derrick have to have some awfully strong equipment to keep the Zloor from breaking loose and ambling off. There's other angles there too. Suppose your derrick did lift him into the shuttle. When you got the shuttle up to the space station, how do you move the Zloor from the shuttle to the station, and then from the station to the rocket for Terra? He got up from the bed and went over to a little table to return with a bottle and a couple of glasses. He poured 2 drinks and handed me one. Here, he said, you look like you could use a quick one. Have a hair of a dog that's going to bite Kurt out of you before you ever leave Mars. I grated. I could stand the rest of it, but what burns me up is that Macron Wesley Marks. Here he is getting rich on the project. Besides what he makes from the government, he's bet every one of us so much that we'll all be out our life savings when we go back. Brother Knapp, you have said it, Mike Holliday said feelingly. He tilted the glass to his lips and drank deeply. I was right behind him. It was more than 2 years later when I walked into the office of Wesley Marks. I noted with pleasure that he still looked as aristocratic as ever. Ah, he said, Mr. Napoleon Prescott. As I recall, the last time we met you objected to my calling your namesake a bust. Don't tell me that we have an additional bust in. I loved it. I loved every word of it, and he must have seen that I did. What are you grinning about? He barked. It was the first time I had seen his poise disturbed. Frankie, I told him, is at the spaceport right now. Johnny will be down on the next shuttle. As you can imagine, the shuttle was pretty well strained to capacity to bring even one at a time. It was no trouble in space, of course, since they were weightless in free fall, but entering the gravitational... He put his hands on the top of the desk and half came to his feet. His eyes were wide. Who are Frankie and Johnny? I feigned surprise. Frankie and Johnny are sweethearts, a couple of Zloors, in this case. Remember? You sent me for them. I thought a male and a female would be best. He slumped back in his chair. You aren't lying? I didn't say anything. How did you do it? With peach pits, I said. Peach pits? Peach pits. Peach pits. They're like apricot pits too, and sometimes prune seeds. What in the world are you talking about, Prescott? Have you lost your mind? I opened the humidor on his desk, took out a cigar, smelled it, bit off the end, lit it, and took a deep puff before answering him. I settled down into a comfortable chair and pointed the lighted end of the cigar in his direction. Between one or the other of us, we had tried everything. Everything. I realized finally that it would have to be an entirely different approach. I took another satisfying drag on the cigar, then went on. I tried lettuce, cabbage, corn, string beans, everything in fact that the hydroponic tanks on Mars could supply in the way of Earth-type food. None of it worked. What in hell are you talking about? Marks blurted. I ignored him. Finally it came to me. Lettuce and the other vegetables I offered would be too light for them. I tried walnut hulls, and then peach pits, and that worked like a charm. You must be insane. You don't seem to understand, Marx, I told him. There was no other way of getting a Zloor on board an earthbound rocket, so I made pets of a couple of them. They love peat pits. Regular delicacy from them, I added reflectively. You'd be surprised how well trained I've got Frankie and Johnny. I'd hate to give them up. I tapped the ash of the cigar off on his heavy carpet and said, However, business is business. Let's see, by our contract, you owe me 5 credits for each month I've been gone, plus a 700 credit bonus for bringing back 2 live Zloors, and then there's that 1,000 credit wager we made. He snapped on his inter-office communicator and growled instructions to his secretary to find whether or not I had brought back 2 live Zloors in the Mars rocket. We sat there silently while she checked. I puffed on the cigar with appreciation and dropped the ashes, pointedly, on the floor. He was irritated, but wouldn't give me the satisfaction of complaining. I knew I was being childish, but I loved it. The inter-office communicator buzzed, and he listened to his secretary's report, then reached down into his desk for a checkbook. He said while he was writing it, I'm sure you'll be pleased to know, Prescott, that in spite of this sum I'm giving you, I'll still make a considerable profit on this deal. I took the check and examined it carefully. I told him, but I wouldn't be very surprised if a good deal of that profit is going to be melting away. Eh? What do you mean? He snapped. I told him, the other boys up on Mars are still well equipped with peach pits. They're all making pets too. The next few rockets from Mars are going to be loaded with Zloors, Wesley, old man. You're going to have a flock of bets to pay off. And besides that, I'm wondering if the government is going to want that many Zloors. As I understand it, 2 is all they're contracted for with you. Of course, you'll have to pay the boys for them. He didn't say anything as I left, fanning the cheque to dry it, but he looked as though he'd met his Waterloo.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And for all of you who believe I am an AI voice, I have a little song. Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer, do. I'm half crazy.